Is she better than Kazuha? I know that sounds like clickbait to say, but that's a genuine question right now. Her kit looks nuts, and she might just be one of the best sub-DPS characters in the entire game. Like, there's no way they don't nerf her at least a little bit right now. I really wasn't expecting a character from Natlan who uses rollerblades, who is a DJ, has a kit that's comparable to Kazuha, and she's Geo. She's basically Kazuha, but instead of crowd control, she heals. She buffs multiple elements at once. She buffs your support characters and makes them buff even more. She increases damage. She adds resistance shred to whatever elements you have in your party. She scales off defense for everything, so she's going to be a tank and easy to swap into. Like, if you want a character that's a phenomenal investment, works well with almost every character in the game and the roster, and you can turn your brain off with this character, like, she's not going to just be good meta-wise in the Abyss. She'll be great just for farting around in the game, farming bosses, throwing her with a random team comp that you feel like running. And we haven't even talked about her constellations because they're nuts. So reading her kit word for word is like trying to decipher a code. It's ridiculous how convoluted these characters' kit explanations are getting. So I'm going to explain the meat and potatoes of what she does and what you need to know. She functions off the Night Soul Blessing mechanic, same as Kanich and Milani. She has a travel gimmick that's rollerblading, and apparently she can scale mountains and sides too. So she's sort of like Milani and Kachina all in one. Now, characters are an investment on your account. She's basically Kazuha, but instead of crowd control, she has healing. And she has multiple buffs she can do simultaneously. What this essentially means is the amount of team comps she'll be really good on is insane. She provides elemental buffs, resistance shred. She's easy to use, and because she scales off defense for everything she does, she'll be tanky and you can sub her in without worrying about her. She can also heal, getting like a 40% elemental boost for all elements with the new Natlan artifact set that goes perfectly with her is crazy, but getting up to almost a 33% resistance shred on elements as well is insanely useful for almost anyone in the game. She gets pretty decent healing too, scaling off her defense. And she's also not going to be a character that ages poorly because she has a cool overworld gimmick where she can travel fast. And she does have sub-DPS capabilities. She will do decent damage scaling off her defense, just with her skill similar to Milani. Now essentially in the nutshell, what you need to know is that her sword attacks don't do anything. Using her regular sword or her regular attacks do nothing. It's when she has her rollerblade stance with the Night Soul Blessing or her skill, she'll get Geo Infusion damage based off her defense, and depending on the elements that you're running, the team comp that you're running, she has something in her skill called source samples. Basically, she has up to 3 samplers that she can generate different soundscapes, purely based on the elemental type of our party members. And you can decrease elemental resistance depending on the types that you have. So essentially you can just decrease elemental resistance to whatever you want, depending on what your team is. She'll decrease Geo by default with all 3 samplers, but let's say you have a Pyro, a Hydro, and a Cryo, one of them will convert to each. If you have just Pyro, then one of those samples will convert. That is essentially how she functions. So essentially by just using her skill relatively quickly, you can gain elemental resistances depending on the party members that you have. And like I said, you can have a wide variety of different team options here, with characters we have in the game and access to, and future ones we're going to get. And her skill cooldown is only 7 seconds, so that's quick refresh time. When you pop her burst, it's pretty straightforward. She does geo damage scaling off her defense, but depending on your team, if you have 2 or less geo characters in your team comp, which is more than likely to be the case, she will heal the active character in interval scaling off your defense, which means she can sustain you as well as add tons of resistance shred, depending on the elements you need her to. If you have more than 2 geo characters, however, she'll just do 2 more waves of geo damage scaling off her defense. It's not to say that you can't use her in a 3 or 4 geo comp. She'll still add resistance shred and be decent as a sub DPS option. It's just not her most optimal way to play, but definitely doable. And her energy cost is only 60, so you don't really need geo characters with her to even use her burst. And the cooldown is 15 seconds. But if she's your sub DPS, that means you'll have your main DPS or carry on the field while the burst duration is healing, which means you'll sustain your carry, whoever that is. One of her passives just essentially gives you extra defense by 20% for 15 seconds by gaining Night Soul points. Now, to be honest, just through regular gameplay with this character, you're gonna gain Night Soul points. Her kit basically states this in a very convoluted and overly complicated way. Optimally, she's meant to be played with at least 2 other element characters that are not Dendro, Animal, or Geo. That's not to say you can't use her with a Dendro or Animal character, but there's a certain way. We'll go over that in team comps. Her Constellation 1 essentially adds resistance and eruption along with everything else, which is really good. Besides having resistance, shred, and healing and damage buffs, she'll now be providing resistance and eruption at C1. Her C2 is where it gets crazy, depending on the different elemental types you have in your party or who you're using with her. She gains different effects. If you're using other Geo characters or at least one other Geo character with her, Navia or somebody else, that character's going to get a 30% crit rate buff. For Pyro characters, they're going to get a 40% attack buff. So Bennett's going to have his attack increased by 40%. Bennett scales off attack for his burst to give damage increases himself. You see where this gets nuts. Most Pyro characters scale off attack for the most part. Hydro characters get a 40% HP buff. There's not many Hydro characters that do not scale off HP, but even if a Hydro character doesn't scale off HP for damage, having HP buffs only makes you more tanky anyway, especially if you're a glass cannon. Cryo characters get a crit damage buff by 50%. That's nuts. So your Risley or Ganyu on a freeze comp is going to have 50% crit damage increase. And Electro characters get energy restored by 20. So the Raiden Shogun or Cloran would basically have their cooldown for their elemental burst decreased and 20 energy for free. There is so many creative ways you could utilize her C2 on a wide variety of interesting and different team compositions. It's crazy to think about. There are so many possibilities. Her C3 just increases her skill level by 3. Her C4 grants all her party members normal, charged, and plunging damage increases by 65% of her defense. Her C5 increases her burst level by 3. Her C6 essentially just turns her more into a DPS if you wanted it, increases her damage, scaling off her Night Soul Blessing state for her normal plunges and regular attacks, also infused with Geo. It also increases her damage, dealing 300% extra of her defense, increase normal damage. Personally, I don't usually recommend Constellations ever, because there's so many characters coming and going, but this will be the exception if you wanted to go for her C2. I think that's more than enough, and honestly I think it would be a fantastic investment. Even her at C0 is going to be good. Just wait till you hear about her artifact set, because building this character is easy peasy. Now, there's a couple good options for artifacts. The main best one in my opinion is going to be the new one we got in Atlan 5.0, the Hero of Cinder. If you're pulling for this character, go farm this now and you'll be set. And she scales off defense, so it's a no-brainer. For the 2-piece set, when you trigger the Night Soul Burst, you gain 6 energy. So even though she only has a 60 energy cost for her burst, if you are worried because you can't really use her with other Geo characters as well as you'd like to, and if you are worried about her energy, this just makes it that much easier. And for the 4-piece set, after the equipped character triggers a reaction related to their elemental type, all nearby party members gain a 12% elemental damage bonus for the elemental types involved in the reaction for 15 seconds if the character is in the Night Soul Blessing state. When triggering this effect, which you need to anyway to get her elemental resistant shred, all nearby party members gain an additional 28% elemental damage bonus for the elemental types involved in the reaction for 20 more seconds. That's insanity. If you don't have this set farmed up by the time you get her, and you want to run the Arcanic set, you get a Geo bonus damage of 15% in the 4-piece set. Upon attaining an elemental shard through crystallization reaction, all party members gain a 35% damage bonus for that element. It's obviously not as good as the other set, but it's not terrible. And remember, you only need to invest in defense and some crit stats. And as for her weapon, her signature weapon's obviously going to be the best, adding other elemental buffs for your team. But the Cinnabar Spindle's been kicking around my account for a while now. It gives defense buffs, it gives elemental skill damage increase by 80% of your defense. So this one will make her sub DPS capabilities even better. Obviously, if you want to invest in some crit damage or crit rate weapons of 5-star caliber, if you have them, those will obviously be good on her as well. if you don't have a defensive-oriented sword. If you're still worried about her energy, which I really don't see being an issue, you could go with some energy recharge. The Festering Desire is another one that's decent, increasing elemental skill damage by 32% and your elemental skill crit rate by 12. Having some extra crit rate in a rollerblade stance will always be a good thing. As far as team comps go, take your pick. She's going to be insanely good with Neuvillette, Wriothesley, Ganyu, Navia, Cyno, Lenny, Arlecchino, like the list goes on. The only way really not to play her, and even so you could make it work, is having an Anemo and a Dendro character both with her, not optimal, or having her on like a 3 or 4 Geo team, like a mono Geo. It's not even to say she wouldn't add buffs and wouldn't work, it just wouldn't be optimal. But you can still have an Anemo or a Dendro paired with her if it works, like Farina and Jean combination with somebody, or having a Burning team with Emily, Nahida, Hyperbloom team. Like there's a lot of options you can run. Overload comps, freeze comps with Ganyu or Wriothesley. Like I said, I really be surprised if they don't nerf her quite a bit. She's looking way too good here. And the best part about it is, yeah, she's good, but she has such great investment potential because she's gonna be so easy to bring into the overworld, different bosses, farming. If you want to turn your brain off and just kind of fart around in the game, like she's gonna be perfect for that. Pair her with Navia and 2 other elements, she's gonna slap. And because she can heal, she might work really well with Farina. She might not work as well at buffing Farina with the excess healing like Jean, but she can heal enough to get the buffs from Farina while saving you that animal slot to put 2 other elements there. Like, there's a lot of possibilities with this character, and we're not even talking about her C2 yet because it's so cracked. Like, having the potential to have a 50% crit damage buff for Cryo, 40% attack for Pyro, HP buffs for Hydro. Every single character pretty much scales off HP. Kokomi, Milane now, Farina. So she's not only going to buff your DPS, but she's literally going to buff your supports that support better now with her on your team. Anyways, the team compositions are quite endless, and I'm going to wrap the video up there. But what are your guys' thoughts on this character? Do you think she's going to get nerfed quite a bit because she's looking a little broken right now? Or do you think they're going to leave her be for the most part? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Are you planning on C2ing her? And if so, will this ruin your chances to get the Pyro Archon or possibly the Captain if he's playable? These are the decisions we have to make. But if you're on the fence with her, I won't tell you what the right decision is, only that she's going to be an incredibly great investment. That I feel comfortable saying with absolute certainty. So I hope this was helpful. I do hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and as always, we will see you all in the next one. Later.